Welcome to Last Week in AWS, where I have somehow barely managed to survive reInvent 2024, albeit by the skin of my teeth. I did many things. I got to live skeet the Matt Garman keynote for those of you who missed it. I made an appearance on the AWS Developer Podcast, which you should only listen to after this one because I am funnier than that. I'm not sure who held whose pets hostage, but AWS somehow got Apple on stage to talk about their chip offerings. Now, understand that Apple will, under extreme duress, admit that they do some of their work on computers. Nobody has any friends who work at Apple. We all just used to know some folks we somehow lost touch with. I gave a talk about cloud financial management with two AWS friends, didn't get tackled off the stage, and am told that the video recording should be posted later this week. I corrected a previous assumption that the managed NAT gateway pricing was the most customer hostile thing that AWS has done. Instead, they had a giant floor that had moving video on it that made everyone nauseous. It was the most disgusting thing I've seen since my AWS bill. And I laid down a challenge for AWS around Q Developer, and it actually got tantalizingly close when someone tried to implement it. So please don't ask me about anything else cloud for the next few days. I need to decompress. Now, what are the highlights of what came out? AWS announces access to VPC resources over AWS Private Link. It increasingly feels like AWS's networking enhancements serve to flatten the network. I mean, you can take this feature, for example. It no longer matters whether a resource is in a VPC or on premises. It can be accessed the same way, exposed to partners, etc., etc. This is ideally a glimpse of a simpler future of how computers talk to one another.
This episode is sponsored in part by my day job, the Duckbill Group. Do you have a horrifying AWS bill? That can mean a lot of things. Predicting what it's going to be, determining what it should be, negotiating your next long-term contract with AWS, or just figuring out why it increasingly resembles a phone number, but nobody seems to quite know why that is. To learn more, visit duckbillgroup.com. Remember, you can't duck the Duckbill bill. And my CEO informs me that is absolutely not our slogan.
Announcing Amazon Aurora, DSQL or DSQL or I don't care. This kind of release is AWS at its best, doing hard engineering problems in ways that aren't straightforward or simple, wrapped up and delivered as a functional service. Ready for your workloads, albeit in preview. Don't trust it. It was refreshing to see the keynote start last week with this kind of focus on real problems that'll solve hard issues for new and existing customers alike. Announcing Amazon Bedrock IDE in preview as part of Amazon SageMaker Unified Studio. There were a lot of announcements like this one. A bunch of machine learning integrations and enhancements in a snake eats itself ecosystemic sprawl. And I'm sure that all of these are important to someone, and AWS sure seemed awfully excited about them. But I'm not seeing customers getting worked up about these releases at all. Are those specific customers hiding? If you're out there, please press your call button so I know you're there. AWS announces Amazon CloudWatch Database Insights. Now, I am sure someone at AWS is going to reach out to me to correct the record about how Database Insights is the feature, and it gives insights into your databases. But I won't hear it. This is something that gives insights into your CloudWatch database. Because remember, anything can be a database if you hold it wrong. Amazon DynamoDB Global Tables previews multi-region strong consistency. And this is really neat. But I'm going to quote from the documentation because it absolutely belongs front and center. Global tables with MRSC are available in preview only. You shouldn't use them for production workloads. If you use things that are marked preview for production workloads, I hope you know what you're doing. because from the outside, what you're doing looks negligent. Amazon EC2 introduces allowed AMIs to enhance AMI governance. I sure hope there wasn't a talk about this last week because I don't think I can stand the existence of a video that no doubt had hundreds of cases of Amazonians mispronouncing AMI with 2 syllables as opposed to its proper 3. Announcing Amazon EC2 i8G instances. We're up to version 8 now? Wait a minute. It says here 60% better compute performance compared to previous generation i4G instances. So what the hell is this generational numbering scheme? We're teetering on the edge of instance names becoming less useful indicators of generation and more a marketing opportunity. Announcing Amazon EKS Auto Mode. This thing charges roughly 10% of not just your control plane costs, but your EC2 worker nodes as well, just to run Managed Carpenter for you? Really? That is an absurd amount of money for something customers can very trivially do for themselves. I don't care about the rest of the service features because I already hate it due to the pricing being this predatory. Announcing Amazon EKS hybrid nodes. Okay, what is going on with the EKS team? Do we need to open a GoFundMe for them or something? This is going to charge 2 cents an hour per vCPU on hardware that you own just to let EKS manage it for you. To give you some context, I wrote this on my M1 MacBook Pro. So back up your laptop, Skippy. It's going to production. And if I were to put this on there, it would cost me $150 a month to do it. When did EKS go from a decent Kubernetes control plane to chocolate bars stuffed with expensive razor blades? Announcing Amazon Elastic VMware Service in preview. This is a great offering for companies who haven't managed to migrate away from VMware yet, fools, and absolutely nobody else. After the dumb games that Broadcom has been playing with VMware pricing, I do not understand who is going to stick around for more rounds of pantsed by my vendor yet again. Announcing Amazon FSx Intelligent Tiering, a new storage class for FSx. And this should come as no surprise to anyone listening to this, but I soundly endorse it. There are no per-file monitoring fees. It automatically stages files in and out of its tiers, and it compresses on the back end for you. Use this unless you have good reason not to. And let me know what that reason is, please, because from here, I really can't see it. Amazon Q Developer can now automate code reviews, which is amazing. Amazon has somehow taught a robot to see a 30,000-line pull request, then comment, LGTM, ship it. Amazon Q Developer announces automatic unit test generation to accelerate feature development. I spent a bit of time last week with GitHub Copilot attempting and failing to write unit tests for a Lambda function. It kept messing up one key thing, which is failing to mock the AWS services properly. Either Q Developer is going to solve this for me, or I'm going to be freaking insufferable about how crap the product is later this month. Amazon S3 adds new default data integrity protections. Put this under the I would have bet and lost money that the SDKs were already calculating whether what was received matches what was sent across the wire for S3 transfers. I'm very glad that this is now the case, but I'm also very concerned that I was apparently unreasonably confident about something that I really, really should have investigated more deeply. Announcing Amazon S3 metadata in preview, the easiest and fastest way to manage your metadata. AWS at its best, getting rid of undifferentiated, crappy metadata sidecar systems customers have built all over the place, usually with DynamoDB. I am very excited about what this is going to be used for, and I can't wait to see what you all do with it. Amazon S3 launches storage classes for AWS dedicated local zones. Is no one else deeply and profoundly curious about just what the inside of a dedicated local zone looks like? It's bigger than a colo, smaller than a region, and now apparently is spacious enough to have multiple tiers of S3 objects at least somewhat significant scale. Announcing Amazon S3 tables, fully managed Apache Iceberg tables optimized for analytics workloads. A subcomponent here is called bucket tables, which is just a disgusting term. So we're rebranding it as bucketables, just for my own peace of mind. That said, this is reasonably priced, and it provides decent exposure to Iceberg for folks who haven't already built out massive systems of their own to make it work for them. I'm very curious to get the opinion of other folks, but ones who aren't a disaster waiting to happen when it comes to data like I am. AWS announces Amazon SageMaker Lakehouse. I nodded off during the Star Trek techno-babble that AWS's AI talks inevitably descend into, but congratulations are apparently due to the SageMaker product owner on their new vacation home. AWS Control Tower launches managed controls using declarative policies. Okay, this is going to inspire me to dive into the rat's nest that is my current control tower configuration. You win. AWS announces AWS Data Transfer Terminal for high-speed data uploads. Your data shouldn't live in your data center. It should live in an AWS data center. But you have lots of data. So now you can drive your data to an AWS data center, but not the AWS data center it should live in, where AWS will copy your data and then send it to the right AWS data center. Do I have that right? Amazon Web Services announces declarative policies. Today, AWS announces the general availability of declarative policies, a new management policy type within AWS organizations. And we know it's declarative because it ends with a period, not a question mark. Announcing AWS Glue 5.0. It's up to 5 now? How many iterations of AWS Horse were sacrificed to get here? Okay, look, I'm self-aware. I know that this recurring joke is so profoundly stupid, but I can't help myself. My jokes are, as always, primarily for my own amusement. Just think about how boring this job would be without it. AWS announces invoice configuration. So I've known about this release for months. It was featured in the session talk that I gave, COP 218, video recording forthcoming. For those who aren't aware, when you're briefed on AWS services in advance, some aspects generally aren't shared with you. Usually these are irrelevant details or, for a variety of excellent reasons, aren't firmly set in stone yet. An example would be exact pricing information. I bring this up because unfortunately there's a hiccup in my genius plan to use this feature to pay my AWS bill with the digital equivalent of a wheelbarrow full of nickels. Because unfortunately, there's a service quota of 500 invoices per account. I'm going to request a quota increase, but I do confess that I'm having some significant trouble coming up with a justification that has a snowball's chance in hell of passing muster. For actual legitimate use cases, this is a great change for some large, sophisticated customers. It's almost like financial shitposting wasn't the intended use case for the feature. AWS Marketplace now offers EC2 image builder components from independent software vendors. Jokes on the EC2 image builder team because I've already been using shitty scripts that I found on GitHub as a third-party AMI pipeline component for years. AWS announces AWS Security Incident Response for general availability. Now, the pricing might be off-putting to some folks, but from what I've seen of this service, I like its premise. And remember, the AWS Customer Incident Response Team has been and remains available for free to every customer. They get tagged in via support ticket. My primary concern about this tooling isn't necessarily the price, but rather that it necessitates that customers get religion around guard duty, third-party instrumentation, or some combination of both. And that has the potential to be very expensive. As is so often the case, the cost of doing something in AWS goes well beyond the sticker price and into the secondary and tertiary expenses that the product triggers downstream.
Here at the Duckbill Group, one of the things we do with, my day job is we help negotiate AWS contracts. We just recently crossed $5 billion of contract value negotiated. It solves for fun problems, such as how do you know that your contract that you have with AWS is the best deal you can get? How do you know you're not leaving money on the table? How do you know that you're not doing what I do on this podcast and on Twitter constantly and sticking your foot in your mouth? To learn more, come chat at duckbillgroup.com. Optionally, I will also do podcast voice when we talk about it. Again, that's duckbillgroup.com.
Announcing AWS Transfer Family web apps. Okay, I know. I have been lamenting the lack of an easy upload, download web app for uploading files into S3 that I can toss business users for years. But when I asked for this, I do admit that I was expecting something a little different, more along the lines of here's a link you can give people and not think about anymore. And a little less when the web app is enabled, it costs you 50 cents an hour. I am very skeptical of the pricing here. I get and I endorse the endpoint costs for enabling SFTP to S3 gateways. They're for use cases where the $300 or whatnot a month is irrelevant. But this is something that could be relevant for an awful lot of users. And you're going to have to do some convincing to get me around to the idea that a static website that supports large file transfers requires $300 a month of infrastructure in its own right. Buy with AWS accelerates solution discovery and procurement on AWS partner websites. I smell a rat, and I'm not sure exactly how it'll show up or what it's going to gnaw on when it does, but this is either going to lead to third-party software ads on vendor sites, or else it'll be an attempt to pay your entire IT budget by way of your AWS bill. I trust I don't need to explain why you would most definitely not wish to do that. Oracle Database at AWS is now in limited preview. Also in preview this year was a modest Oracle booth on the expo floor. For some unknown reason, they weren't driving a fleet of Teslas around the event with signage dunking on the AWS bill this year. Party Rock improves app discovery and announces upcoming free daily use. Now, originally, Party Rock was free for a limited time, and that time frame was never disclosed. That time is apparently meow, and it's remarkably reasonable and sustainable for AWS. I'm of the increasing conviction that AWS isn't even slightly sorry for party rocking. Announcing the preview of Amazon SageMaker Unified Studio. Okay, we've got 50 or more capabilities under the SageMaker umbrella. How do we want to address that? It's a good question. Messaging is hard. Unfortunately, they solved it in the most AWS way possible, slapping a unified label on it and calling it a day. VPC Lattice now includes TCP support with VPC resources. Reminder, Lattice replaces rather than adds to AWS data transfer pricing. I keep forgetting it exists, and it grows ever more capable. Announcing the 2024 Geo and Global AWS Partners of the Year. Are you one of the partners on this list? Because if so, congratulations. You are quite literally the only people on the planet who give a badger's ass about this. Amazon MemoryDB multi-region is now generally available. Given the timing of this release, either MemoryDB is using DynamoDB under the hood, or else its twin brother. And finally, top announcements of AWS reInvent 2024. If you want to appreciate what I live through when I'm putting this podcast together, just scroll down the list and look at how many of these there are. Then ask yourself which ones you find relevant to your job, or at least interesting. Careful, don't get too close. That's the abyss gazing into you. I'm cloud economist Corey Quinn. I want to go home.